Friends, those who are physically here and those who are following our proceedings online from within and without the country, here at the Department of History, University of Nairobi, we have the pleasure to welcome you to our continuing staff seminar series entitled Emerging Horizons of Historical and Archaeological Research in Kenya. This week, we have one of our colleagues, Dr. George Gona, who is going to speak to us on a subject he has entitled, quote, Some Reflections on the 1971 Coup in Kenya. Dr. Gona is a senior lecturer at our Department of History and Archaeology here at the university. He is a researcher in labor history, underground politics, and peace studies. He holds a PhD from the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa, and a Master of Arts and a Bachelor of Arts from here at the University of Nairobi. In this presentation today, Dr. Gona argues that the 1971 coup in Kenya is yet to receive full attention. This is with the exception of anecdotal media coverage and not least a few academic write-ups. There seems to have been two coup plots, each with different justifications in wanting to overthrow Kenyatta I's government. This study will examine the contradictions of these coup plots and provide insights into the socio, political, and historical issues previously not discussed. Friends, without much ado, it's now my pleasure to welcome Dr. Gona to speak to us. And my name is Kenneth Umbungi. Dr. Gona, please, you're very welcome.
Thanks very much, Dr. Umbungi, for that invitation to speak this afternoon. Thanks everybody for having me this afternoon. Since giving my topic to Dr. Umbungi, my ideas have evolved, and I thought I would reframe my topic of discussion this afternoon to read the 1971 coup in Kenya, unraveling the civil side of an insurrection. So I would want to focus on the civil conspirators. I would call them civil conspirators. This is an ongoing research that I began sometime in 2016, and I'm sharing my reflections on these emerging issues as I conclude and possibly have this work published. The story of the 1971 coup is hardly told, except for anecdotal coverage in the newspapers and a few academic write-ups. A full treatise is yet to be done on this episode in Kenya's history. There seems, in my view, two-in-one coup, with competing narratives of origins and reasons for the plot to overthrow Jomo Kenyatta's government. In this presentation, I reflect on these parallels and shed some light on social and political issues and circumstances around the plot hitherto discussed. I first deal with the structural reasons for the coup and subsequently address the individual motivations to explain the occurrence of the coup, and then suggest that this side of the civil insurrectionists undermined the prospect of a successful insurrection. There isn't much that has been published, around the coup. A few scholars, particularly Charles Hornsby, so far have done some research on this. But a few of these, including Charles Hornsby, have suggested that General Joseph Ndolo, the leader of the military at the time, played a key role in the coup's plotting, and that had the conspiracy been successful, Ndolo would have assumed the presidency. In the literature, Jomo Kenyatta is portrayed as a noble man because of his decision to neither imprison nor put General Ndolo to death following this coup. There is also mentioned in the newspaper articles that Ouma Muga, a young academic teaching at Makerere University in the 1960s and 70s, was part of the organizers of the plot. But how he did this part from Makerere is yet actually to be told. Another person that is mentioned in the newspapers in passing is Joseph Owino, who is said to have been a key conspirator. He was a former military man who had been involved in Kenya's first mutiny in 1964 in Lanate, where he was found guilty and almost was jailed until Tom Mboya intervened on his behalf, and he escaped jail. Joseph Owino was discharged, was of course found guilty and discharged dishonorably. There is therefore, from the discussion, this anecdotal mention of these civilians without giving due attention to detail to their agency in the conceptualization, planning, and the reasons for wanting to overthrow Kenyatta's government. A further probe, therefore, is necessary in the way these individuals, including the discussions they had away from the barracks, on how they organized and what transpired during this episode in Kenya's history. It is also prudent to unravel the reasons of the plot beyond the disdain for Kenyatta's ethnicism and exclusionary policies that he was increasingly entrenching in Kenya's body politic. At this point, I would like to talk about, towards the coup, the structural and individual motivations for a coup. Bobo Ndiaye, a scholar in military organizing in Africa, claims that Kenyatta put in place operational and logistical procedures that made it more difficult for anyone in the regular troops to execute a coup. These included limiting the size of the army, spreading infantry troops across Kenya, and making the army rely on the Air Force for quick deployment. Kenyatta also funded the paramilitary general service unit twice as much as was available to the army. Equally noteworthy was Kenyatta's change in the ethnic composition of the JSU in favor of his own ethnic group after independence. At the time of independence, for example, he urged that Kikuyu replace the British commander. By 1966, Kenyatta had succeeded in purging the JSU of non-Kikuyu, especially the Luo. Indeed, Kenyatta frequently disregarded the police service board and the seniority requirement for promotions. So through this strategy, he had by 1970 placed Ben Gethi, a Kikuyu, to head the Kenya police, having bypassed Aaron, a Luo, who was 2 ranks senior to Gethi. Gradually, therefore, Kenyatta made sure that the Kikuyu were well represented in the army. it must be remembered that because of the ethnic targeted recruitment of the colonial government, the ethnic composition of the army at independence favored the Kamba and the Kalenjin, since the colonial government hardly recruited from among the Kikuyu. So in his quest to reorganize the army following the 1964 mutiny, Kenyatta got the opportunity to address the imbalance at the lower ranks. He hastily replaced many British officers with Africans, and as a consequence, the majority of the top officers were Kamba and Kalenjin. So it is evident that he had to allow a Kamba to lead the army, but that he made sure that a Kikuyu served as the deputy. As a result of these initiatives, the officer corps had approximately 23% Kikuyu members by 1967, demonstrating the quick Kikuyization of the armed forces. Increasingly, under the annoyance of the army commander, General Ndolo, the extensive training of Kenya's military was not aimed at instilling the virtues of professionalism, but rather was to serve to harden soldiers and prepare them technically to fight the shift of war. Yet, training alone could not lead to professionalism. Kenya's military required the independence and protection from unwarranted political, ethnic, or other influences, cleavages that could be identified with Kenyatta by 1969. While his aim in institutionalizing the various strategies was to undermining or manipulating the army, was to forestall any chances of the military staging a coup against his regime, he actually succeeded to create a rift with the army commander, making the chances of a coup inevitable. In addition to the growing tension between Kenyatta and the army commander, developments in Uganda, where Idi Amin in 1971 had overthrown Milton Obote's government, drew the attention of Kenyatta of the possibility of the same happening in the country. Charles Hornsby notes that the political unrest that descended upon the nation in the wake of Amin's coup there indicated that Kenyatta, in quotes and quotes, would prepare for any eventuality of a coup. He points out that the likelihood of a coup in Kenya was very ripe, and it was growing by 1969, with senior army officers, including Ndolo, musing of the country's future. The possibility, like I said, of a coup staged by the army was therefore on the horizons. A March 1971 British High Commission report titled An Army Coup in Kenya and Succession to the Presidency in Kenya, 1971, which is housed at the British Kew Archives. Ndolo is observed to have spoken to many people around February and March in 1971, clearly indicating that he would have to stage an army coup upon Kenyatta's passing, if not earlier. According to Hornsby, the British took Ndolo seriously, believing that there was a real possibility of an attempted coup within the next 18 months. In newspaper reports of the trial of the conspirators when they were caught, show that Ndolo had convened 13 goat-eating meetings at his home in Ukambani, where he discussed the army's plan to overthrow the government. The newspapers also report that the MP for Yatta, Gideon Mutiso, was the chairman of the Revolutionary Council, who upon interrogation confessed to investigators of having written a statement that Ndolo was to read when they took over power. The coup plot was to be executed on 8th April, but was diffused thanks to the actions of an enthusiastic, overzealous, excited, and lacking of caution and foresight of two gentlemen called Benedict Oko and Joseph Owino. Interestingly, the existence of this civilian group of conspirators is not captured by the intelligence reports of the British at the time. An incident in Kenya's history, the death or the murder of Tom Mboya in July 1969, ignited public rage and demonstrations that led to a panic in Kenya's court, or in Kenyatta's court. Among many things, Kenyatta went on an oathing spree of the Kikuyu aimed at binding his ethnic group to support and fight for the presidency to remain in the house of Mumbi at all costs. It got worse when Joseph Ndolo, the army commander, realized that ammunition and military wares were being handed to civilians among the Kikuyu, ostensibly for this purpose of protecting the presidency from being captured by the non-Kikuyu. It became increasingly apparent that the army had to plot to remove Kenyatta as president. In this sense, Kenyatta's ethnic mobilization enhanced the chances for staging a coup, thus coalescing with the long-term structural issues inherited from the colonial government, but perpetuated and enhanced by Kenyatta. I would like to then move to talk about the other side, the civil conspirators. As already mentioned, Tom Mboya's murder on July 5th, 1969 was attributed to Kenyatta's succession politics. This entailed Kenyatta having a crackdown on Jaramogi Odinga's Kenya People's Union, its followers, and of course the detention of Jaramogi and some followers. The murder of Tom Mboya shook the nation to its core. Mboya had been Kenyatta's Mr. Fix-It, having ably dealt with the government's opponents in parliament, and reservingly coined and well-articulated government policies and plans, including formulating the now questioned and largely debated sessional paper number 10 of 1965. He plotted to hobble trade unions by putting in place labor laws that were restrictive to labor practice, including exercising the right to strike. This resulted in reduction of workers' strikes that spiked after independence. Yet, Kenyatta and his men killed him. While Tom Mboya was not the darling of many, ostensibly, of course, for being close to Kenyatta, and particularly, this repression of Kenyatta didn't, most people didn't like. He became, at his death, a people's person, and to the Luo, our son, our own person. Now, aside from the generalized embracing of Mboya in the wake of his death, Tom Mboya's death deeply hurt some individuals. Among them was Sylvanus Odor, who became a conspirator in the coup of 1971. Odor hailed from Siaya, where he attended his primary school, and after sitting his Kenya Certificate of Primary Education, that is class 8, he started working in Uganda before relocating to join the urban proletariat, the men looking for a better life to enjoy matunda ya uhuru, as articulated by Ateno Odhiambo. He quickly became involved in Nairobi's urban politics, especially the politics of Mboya. He also went to college on his own, receiving a qualification in secretarial duties that helped him land a job at Peugeot Company Limited, and later the Canadian High Commission, where he was working at the time of the planned insurrection. Now, Odor is very central to my discussion here because he seemed to have been very close Mboya. When I interviewed Odor, he painted a picture of a devoted follower of Mboya. When asked why was he very close to him, he said, look, yeah, I liked Mboya because he articulated many issues. He was a good English speaker, and Odoro actually speaks very, very articulately in English. He admits to attending all his political gatherings in Nairobi, whether they were for his campaigns or to spread the word about the objectives of the government. It made no difference that he was ill. As a result, Mboya's death devastated him. He therefore held a strong dislike for Kenyatta and hoped he would take action to get rid of him. Odor, flitted with the idea of fueling up an oil tanker and driving it into one of Kenyatta's massive rallies that he held at the time in the eastern part of Nairobi. However, before carrying out his plan, he discussed it with a friend, Elderman. Elderman was the title given to the current MCAs of Nairobi. They are called Elderman. So he discussed his idea with one Elderman of Nairobi City Council, who pleaded with him not to do what he had planned. Instead, the Elderman persuaded him to think of a plot to overthrow Kenyatta. The big assignment was how to carry out this suggestion. In December 1970, Odor took leave from work to visit his mother in Sega, Siaya. He went to Mass at the nearby Catholic church. On the first Sunday, he was at home, as was his custom, a very devout Catholic. After leaving church, he rode his bike to Sega Lodge, a distance from home, to enjoy a beer or two before going back home. A couple of beers later, a man entered the pub. He entered the pub, and upon closer inspection, it was Joseph Owino, a former schoolmate who had vanished after finishing his his class 4 exams. Owino had been his senior in school, and they were now meeting after many years. He later learned that he had joined the army and had been involved in that 1964 mutiny in Lanet. In Odor's mind, Owino should have been hanged, and he was convinced that he was at that moment seeing a ghost. Owino explained that he had been saved by Tomboy, who told Kenyatta that Owino was simply a young man who was being overtaken by youth, and that he simply needed to be rehabilitated. So he had been left off the hook. He had been let off the hook. However, he had been rearrested and detained during the 1969 riots over Odinga and the Kenya People's Union, and that he had recently been released. Now, the meeting at Sega assumed significance, a larger-than-life importance in the war story of the coup plot. A civilian element to the plan to overthrow Kenyatta took shape thereafter. Odor took time to show Owino that he had a role to play in reordering society by overthrowing Kenyatta's government. According to him, this was preordained in the Bible. He began by asking Owino a question. How about when someone talks to you about a revolution? Then he went into a roar. And I quote Odor, "To me, a Christian and a Catholic, a revolution was started by none other than Jesus of Nazareth, although his revolution was not to subdue or to use force, but to win people's hearts. But there was a time when he went ballistic in that he took a whip and started whipping people who were turning his father's house into a den of thieves. And he took a whip and whipped the people and overturned those tables. If you take it literally, can't you plan to overthrow the government? Like Jesus had already given a living typical example. He therefore appealed to Owino's conscience and convinced him that he had a responsibility to do something to avenge the murder of the man who saved his life. In convincing Owino to get involved in a plot to overthrow the government, Owino's motivation to get rid of Kenyatta also was fulfilled. Later, when they met Benedict Oko, Odro's friend, they became the three co-conspirators, the three civilian conspirators. After the encounter at Sega, they planned to meet in Nairobi, where the father discussed the matter. Here, Odor introduced him to Oko, a friend of him and a station manager at Makadara railway station, who clothed the whole idea by picking up from where Odor had stopped his liberation theology treatise to Owino. Oko too pitched his justification for the need to overthrow Kenyatta on the biblical story of Gideon and the stories of God's people in Leviticus. The gist of Oko's argument was about the roles that these people played. You play the role of the man, you have to do something about it, and if you are going to do something about it, planning to avenge the downtrodden, the oppressed, you are doing it with the orders from above, not below here. And that one is something should be done. If the Bible is the one which is talking with authority, then who are you to oppose it? In their discussion, Odor and Oko appraised Owino of who the downtrodden were. They told him about those who were killed at the Kenyatta and Odinga confrontation during the opening of the Russian hospital in Kisumu in 1969. They also talked about the way in which Kenyatta's riders, motor riders, shot young people standing by the roadside, waving small flags at the presidential motorcade as they drove fast towards Nairobi. They also talked about the unexplained murders in Ikawangware that the press had not talked about or reported about. Of course, there was all that was becoming obvious to Kenyans, Kenyatta's Kikuyanization of all public sectors. They cited Kenyatta's action of promoting Ben Gethi, a Kikuyu, to the position of police commissioner, overlooking Michael Arun, the deputy commissioner at the time, who had more qualification and experience than Ben Gethi. There was also more to the downtrodden message. As the members of the lay apostolic of the Legion of Mary at the Makadara Catholic Church, Oko and Odor were involved in visitations to church members' homes. And in these home visitations, they advised Christians who eloped or did not solemnize their marriages in church to do so according to the church's teachings. If there were marriages and there were children born out of those marriages and people who were not baptized, they also encouraged people to be baptized. They visited also people in hospitals, praying for them and with them. During these visitations, they argued they got to learn people's suffering. People were talking of unemployment. But they also visited Asian homes where the Asians were complaining of the wanton loss of work because Asians were being relieved of their employment en masse. Yet these Asians had chosen to stay in Kenya after Kenyatta had announced the Africanization policy of 1967. These in total, according to Oko and Odor, were that downtrodden. In their view, they were to lead a coup with the view of actually alleviating the suffering of Kenyans, a task coup plotters hardly follow through. Now, when I conversed with these conspirators, the civil conspirators, something that comes to mind and they talk about is that they want really out to cause a coup. They talked of a revolution. Now, I asked myself what this revolution was and what this coup was. They emphatically told me that they did not wish to fully involve the military because it's the military that brings about coups. But civilians, in their view, are involved in revolutions. Secondly, they argued that they only wanted to involve the military as a backup in case part of the military resisted their takeover. They would actually then use the backup of the military to counter that. Their third argument was that they feared that a full military involvement and a takeover would not guarantee a quick return to civilian rule, which they had observed in Africa where there had been coups at the time to have been the case. So in these three sensibilities, therefore, this informed their cautionary engagement with the army. However, my take about the idea of a revolution assumes some things that do not really stand correct. First of all, the idea of a revolution assumes that they are good coups, and therefore, rather they are good coups, and that, or they are bad coups rather, and that you better call for revolutions because coups are bad. The other assumption about the idea of revolutions, which these conspirators, civil conspirators, had was that revolutions have a higher calling than coups. Coups are about kicking out a government and taking over, killing people, etc. And again, this is not necessarily the case. Andrew Miller, who has written about coups, has observed that the notion of a good coup or a bad coup is a myth. There's nothing like good coup or a bad coup, or there's nothing like a bad coup or a good revolution. Carrying out either has its consequences, and many a time are negative, including the bloodless coups. Having a bloodless coup was a good imagination on the part of the civil conspirators, and the credit should be given to them for such an imagination. However, to think that they would do it without shedding blood was stretching their imagination too far. According to Hannah Arendt, a social commentator, researcher, 20th century, a known scholar, a revolution entails a new beginning, a fresh start. Considering their plan for a revolution, I asked what they had in mind beyond not shedding blood. The answer to this question was varied. We will end the repression. We will put Kenyatta to jail for killing Boya. We will end favoritism, recruitment of in the civil service and the military, and so on. There was hardly anything novel about all this. Perhaps it amounted to avenging and repressing Kenyatta's repression or repressive rule with another equally vengeful one. Among the conspirators was talk about taking key ministerial positions in a new government. One conspirator told me that he had been earmarked to be Minister of Foreign Affairs. This was about sharing spoils than the new beginning Arendt's envisaged. Owino was the linkman to the army when who he had known Ndolo and General Mulinge when they enlisted in the military. Owino and Ndolo therefore respected one another as a result, and they made contact quickly upon the discussion between the three conspirators. The first meeting between the civil conspirators and General Ndolo was held in a church vehicle where there was a short discussion on the plans to collaborate in the coup. Two other meetings were held at St. Francis Xavier Church, Parklands. Here, Ndolo agreed to support the conspirators with ammunition that was arriving shortly from suppliers abroad. The plan, therefore, was that the ammunition would be given to the civil conspirators before it was recorded at defense headquarters. With this guarantee, they went ahead quietly talking to confidants about their plans. Odor was therefore instrumental subsequently to recruiting Apollo Wakiaga, a long-serving civil servant, and Donald Ward, the East African Airways sales manager, to mention a few. In their deliberations, the core members of the civil section of the conspirators felt that it was necessary to get support from the East African leaders to execute their plan. Uganda was still fresh from a coup led by Idi Amin, and they were hesitant in approaching Amin. They decided to approach President Mwalimu Julius Nyerere of Tanzania, who at the time had forced relationship with Kenyatta, and therefore expected him to morally and financially support their plan. To progress their plan, they needed a man of letters, to use Odor's terminology, an intellectual to do the diplomatic work. They reached out to Dr. Ouma Muga, then a young academic teaching at Makerere University, who accepted to be part of the group and was engaged, and also engaged Nyerere on this matter. He would visit from time to time, he would visit Nairobi to be debriefed on how the plans were developing and return to Makerere. In February 1971, he traveled to Tanzania on a mission to meet Nyerere. And upon his return to the country, he told Odoro, Owino, and Ouko that he met the Tanzanian president, but had observed, in quotes and quotes, a red flag. According to Odoro, Ouma had a way of wriggling himself out of tight situations and got away with further scrutiny about this first visit by telling them that Nyerere had asked him to pay another visit for further discussion on the matter. When the three conspirators asked Ouma about the return trip to Tanzania, he said he could not do it immediately because he was busy on a tight teaching schedule in Makerere, and that he was about to examine students, and therefore he would not come and go to Tanzania. There grew, therefore, mistrusts by the day between Odor, Muga, Owino, and Ouko. Odor, in particular, questioned Ouma's explanation of his first visit. He therefore grew cold feet on the plan to continue with this reaching out to Nyerere, but the other two, that is Owino and Ouko, with exuberance and without caution, decided to go behind Odor and actually travel to Tanzania. It is this journey to Tanzania that ended up messing the coup to the plan. Because once they go to Tanzania, their plan was discovered, they were caught and deported back to the country. Out of, therefore, the effort of these civilian conspirators, the coup was discovered. About the same time, the East African diplomats were actually making moves to reach out to Tanzania for financial and moral support. The same group, the civilian group, decided also to reach out to the Americans. And the interest of the Americans was based on a gentleman called Ivan Brown. Ivan Brown was the CIA representative to Kenya at the time of Tom Mboya's death. He was very close to Tom Mboya. And they thought that reaching out to Ivan Brown would give them a boost, particularly financially support. The gentleman, the East African Airways sales manager, was traveling to America, and the co-conspirators decided to give him a small note to deliver when he gets to the USA, to deliver to Brown. Unfortunately, this gentleman never met Brown. Instead, he decided to post the note. And when Brown received it, when Udall learned later, when Brown received it, he was wondering, what are these Kenyans really still looking me out for? I was deported for making noise about Tom Mboya's death. So what he decided was to post it back to Mrs. Tom Mboya, Pamela Mboya. And at the time, all mail were being monitored. So unfortunately, that note was discovered in the post office and was taken to Pamela Mboya, who said she was familiar with what was going on, but she had no more details. Finally, and that is a social angle to this episode in Kenya's history, Pamela Mboya had refused to be inherited. And by virtue of being shown this note, it was a blackmail. You either get inherited or we expose you further. So he subsequently then was actually inherited based on these gentlemen who had actually messed him up. This note exposed the coup again. In other words, by the act of the civil conspirators, the coup was diffused. I'd like to conclude my preliminary investigations by stating three things. One is that motivations for the 1971 coup in Kenya have in the literature been assigned to largely structural explanations. The hate for Kenyatta, exclusion, marginalization, etc. However, as demonstrated in my presentation, individual motivations played a major role in the mooting of the plan to oust Kenyatta's government. I argue that there is a danger in inferring the coup's motivation purely from a structural angle. The mere fact that Ndolo and his men were tired of Kenyatta's manipulation and of the military is seldom a reliable guide to the understanding of the coup. Secondly, hitherto, there had been little known about the church as a space used by the civilian conspirators to plan their revolution. In other words, the talk about a military coup plot in 1971 is half the story about this insurrection. The civilian conspirators seem to have had a different plot, despite reaching out to the military for their support. It is not clear how they were going to execute this, but they nonetheless were emphatic about their plans to oust Kenyatta. In short, there were two coups in one, with some convergence based on need for support, particularly needed by the civilian conspirators. And thirdly, the civil conspirators undermined the plot to have a successful coup. Without caution and foresight, they exposed the plot and they were stopped in their tracks. Thank you very much.
Well, things are beginning to get interesting, and I'm increasingly getting convinced that we actually need this forum. There is a lot that we are yet to know historically on how, for example, Kenya's post-colonial state was formulated, and the dialectics that informed its establishment. And I think Dr. Gona is filling in that gap that we have had over the years in understanding the role of certain institutions like the military, and of course individual interests in the very fragile way the Kenyan state has existed over the years. George, if I understand you well, you know, US is more or less an embodiment of a fairly new discourse on the history of the struggles of and for nationhood in the country, and also the history of uniformed forces is professionalism, or of course lack of it. And on the other side, there are debates about the configuration of Kenya's polity, and of course the rhetorics of equality as part and parcel of what we loosely call here the fruits of independency, matunda ya uhuru. And as I listened, I think I started sort of savoring the historical anatomy of the evolution of the Kenyan state, and how these very closely intersected with the interests of, you know, interests in quotes of the military and disgruntled political leaders, as well as the elements from the academy. I saw very recently, I think almost a decade back, I saw Professor Ouma Moga, who was part of our department of geography here, and once upon a time, I actually a minister in an assistant minister in the Moi government. You know, in doing this, I had Dr. Gona making what I see as 3 key points. One, of course, is this convergency of structural factors and contingency in determining the coup or the coups of 1971. According to George, there were 2. One was military and the other one was civilian. But we will have a debate on that as we move. So you said generally then that the history of the attempted coups in 1971 was closely tied with attempts to mold a post-colonial state in ways that had ethnic and structural resonance to the dialectics of the establishment and the consolidation of the power of the colonial state. You seem on that to augment the literature that talks about more continuities than discontinuity in the transition from colonial to post-colonial. Secondly, you seem to suggest that the overly predatory nature of the African state, read Kenya in our case, in Africa's post-colony, was really a function of the entanglements of elite politics of survival and attempts to reimagine the grounds of legitimacy away from the extremely hegemonic colonial state. Whether this has succeeded in Kenya or elsewhere is probably a subject for debate this afternoon, friends. And finally, you seem to suggest that overall, the coup attempt of 1971 was executed in the context of the usual matrix of ethnicity, which attend to Kenya's post-colonial politics, and sometimes actually couched in religious idioms. No wonder then that in much more recent years, we have had electioneering politics, which is couched on the same religious idioms. We are going to Canaan. We are approaching Canaan, but then there are crocodiles. You know, so perhaps in a separate seminar, we would need to discuss the intersections between idioms and you know, politics in Kenya, and how that has evolved over the years to the extent that it informs our everyday politics. I think I need to stop there and invite those from our on-site audience who have questions, observations, contributions to make to Dr. Gona's presentation. Raise up your hand. I can see Dr. Gache over there. Who else? Any other person who has some question? Yes, Alex Mokaya over there. Yes, and then we have Mark Otiende over here. And Michelle, you seem to have a question, or? Oh, okay, no. So we will start with Dr. Gache, and then we go to Mokaya, and then we come to Mark in that order.
Thank you very much, Ken. Thank you, George, for that very enlightening presentation this afternoon. My question or comment revolves around Cold War politics of the day, which did not appear to feature very much, maybe with a good reason. But of course, coups were fashionable in the immediate post-colonial states. But in Kenya, we also see a growing rift soon after independence, manifesting in the Cold War politics, the rift between Jomo Kenyatta and Odinga, and the subsequent local politics, KPU, and so on and so forth. And whereas from your discussion, this attempted coup of 1971 appears to be playing out in the politics of dissent of the day, ethnicity, and so on and so forth. I would like to ask whether there is any evidence from your research of an external hand, or these efforts wholly local. That's my question.
Good. Yes.
And just a rider, George, this may be out of the ambit of your discussion, but I'm wondering if the coup realigned in the short term, whether it realigned local politics. We see what happened in 1982. There was a very immediate purge by Moi. So what happens in the immediate post-attempted coup? Thank you.
Good. Very interesting. Two questions there. Yes, Alex.
Thank you. I have 4 questions. Now, the first one, in Kenya, we associate politicians with governance. But in the presentation that Dr. has given, I've not had any politician involved in this coup. Or if there is, then I need to advise, was there any politician involved in this one, or was purely a civilian military affair? That's the first one. The second one, the 1982 coup, it was closely related, let me frame this way. Is there any relationship between a coup and the academy? Because in 1982, the University of Nairobi was mentioned, not as a university, not as an institution, but some key figures within the university were mentioned in the coup. And then in this 1971, I can also hear or get somebody from Makerere University, even being an operative. So is there a relationship between the coup and the academy? And then the third one, the balance of ethnicity in this country. When you look at even general elections, they more or less come out as ethnicity, just but population census of ethnic groups in Kenya. When you look at this 1971 coup, the Kikuyus and Luos are mentioned, save for Ndolo, who was actually the lead of the military. What is the role of these two communities, even in relation to the 1982 coup? They're also mentioned. So what is it that promotes these two communities come up? Although when I attended a public lecture of Sharad Rao, when he was saying the Asians are the 44th community, then he was questioning who's the first and who's the second. So how are these two communities in political governance? And then the last one, could we say that JK, Jomo Kenyatta, was a passive planner of the 1972 coup based on his characters, based on his administration, based on how he conducted the military? Could he be a passive planner of this coup against his own government? Thank you.
That's a very interesting one. The last one, George, looks like Alex took that directly from me. Could it have been a way of trying to seek for legitimacy using alternative means? Because President Kenyatta was increasingly facing opposition, and the ideological differences were really dealing a blow to his efforts to unite the country. And he needed to create an environment to divert attention from these problems by dramatizing a situation where somebody somewhere, an enemy of Kenyans, was trying to destabilize the hard-won Uhuru. And Mzee then assumed his invincible position. It's related to the question that Maggie asked about the aftermath. Maybe. Yes, Mark.
Thank you, Dr. Mbongi. I have a few concerns from Dr. Gona's presentation. And first, I want to acknowledge that I'm one of the few historians who didn't know that there was a coup plot during Kenyatta's era. So to my understanding, I want to ask the following concerns. One, why are all these coups failing? What's the common denominator? Why all of them are not succeeding? Then the second concern is, what makes a coup successful? And Dr. Gona, in your own perspective, do you foresee a coup in future in Kenya? And those are my concerns. Thank you.
That's a good one. A historian being asked to talk about the history of the future. That's an interesting one. I think then, George, let me ask something related to what Mark has just asked, since I'm moderating this. 64, a mutiny, mainly in Lanet, in Nakuru. 71, the two coups that you seem to be talking about, one civilian and another military, and you'll have to qualify to us how you call a civilian attempt a coup. And then 82. And then bearing in mind that these coups were fashionable in Africa within the first decade of independence. West Africa, Nigeria, Ghana, Cote d'Ivoire, Togo. They were all affected by this. Then the question is, and this is, I'm emphasizing what Mark asked. What was so unique in Kenya that none of these attempts succeeded? Is it what has saved us? As an undergraduate student of political science, we used to read Root First in our book, Men on Horsebacks. He said, military coups are like virginity. Once broken, you will have so many of them. Once you have one, you will have so many coups, and you will never regain stability again. That was Root First. So what is it that made Kenya to be a unique case? Uganda, it happened. Tanzania was relatively struggling all along. But what is it that made Kenya different from what was happening in West Africa? Thank you. You can take those ones and then we can go online.
Thanks for those questions and observations. Maybe I will start with Mark's concerns and Dr. Mbogi's observation. I'm not a foreteller of doom, and as a historian, I'll be lying that I would be talking about tomorrow and what's going to happen, whether we're going to have a coup or not. But I think for the first time in Kenya's history, particularly with regard to the 1971 insurrection, there is actually a link between parliament, civil conspirators, and the military. Alex had asked whether there were politicians. Indeed, the chairman of the Revolutionary Council was Gideon Mutiso, the member of parliament for Yatta, right? So, and I mentioned that he confessed to have written a speech that Ndolo was to actually read when they took over power. So there was actually involvement of it. And that's the fear. That when you have the military, then parliament and civil conspirators actually working close, that becomes really potent, so to speak. But I wouldn't want to speak about the future. So I don't know whether there's going to be a coup or not. Otherwise, I think I'll be accused of planning to overthrow the government of His Excellency Ruto. And I'm not out to do that, right? I mean, I'm happy as an academic. What makes a coup successful? I mean, if we consider the 1971 coup, and I think at the end of it, my discussion or my presentation, I said that the civil conspirators actually undermined the prospect of a successful coup. I used the word enthusiasm, lack of foresight, going forth without caution. That becomes really a problem to many coups. And in the case of Kenya, there's very little caution. Odor told me that he had a lot of question marks about this idea of going to Tanzania and engaging Nyerere. But he was overruled. He was cautious, others weren't cautious. So in the process, that kind of mix, you have people who are cautious, others are not cautious. In the process, then you end up actually messing up a plan. And I think that is associated with the idea of why fail. And replying to Kenneth's concern, there is this interest, in coups, across the board in Africa, and yet while there is success in other spheres, in other countries, Kenya's 1964 mutiny is suppressed, 1971 is diffused, and 1982 is also unsuccessful. I think there is the problem of coordinating. There's a problem of coordinating in all this. You find, for example, in 1971, once the civil conspirators were sure of support, that they were going to get some ammunition that was coming from abroad, they're certain that that was going to happen. They seem to have forgotten that they needed to continue engaging with the military. And for that reason, then, you see a situation where you have a civil conspirators group vis-a-vis the military doing their own thing. So when things got messed up, actually, it's the civil group that actually was tried. And I think that brings me to Dr. Gachi's concern. The military, and I think Dr. Mbongi equally asked us something similar to that. Kenyatta seems to be very shrewd. I said at the beginning of my presentation that Kenyatta didn't want to, look like he was out to really mess the military. So after the coup, he decided not even to try Ndolo. He had his own way of dealing with those people. The many unexplained accidents. Ndolo died in an unexplained accident. CJ Kitili Mwenda died also because he was also part of the conspiracy. CJ also died in an unexplained car accident. He seemed to have been shrewd in dealing with the people who were opposed to him. But in the aftermath of the coup, those who were tried, interesting again, were civilians. 18 of them. Or in the papers, they talk about 12, but it's actually 18. And it was not just the Kikuyu and the Luo. It was not only Luo who actually conspired against Kenyatta in the 1971 coup. The 18, you had about 6 Luo. The rest were Kalenjin and different ethnic groups. So there was a wider following among the civil conspirators, to topple to topple Kenyatta at the time. Now, Dr. Gachi's question, was there evidence of an external hand? This is very interesting because I'm really also interested in this always external hand. External hand that really works until today, including our politics today. At this particular juncture, there's no ideological, from my interviews, if talking to the conspirators, there's no idea emerging from those conspirators talking about Marxism or communism, etc. They were just having this obsession with getting rid of Kenyatta for personal reasons, under the guise of dealing with the suffering of the people, etc. So there's very little at that particular time. Of course, Tom Mboya was not a darling of many because he was seen to have been a CIA agent, because Ivan Brown was his very close friend, the CIA representative at that time. And indeed, Ivan had been deported, declared persona non grata for exactly making noise about the death of Tom Mboya. But because Tom Mboya was there in person, it never occurred to those who wanted to avenge the death of Tom Mboya that they had any ideological inclination. Passive planner, that's an interesting one, right? And Mwalimu seemed to conspire, to subscribe to this. Kenyatta, the passive planner. I need to do real research on that, but I want to say this. This I'm picking it from our discussion in the Mau Mau conference. I think we have given Kenyatta too much credit, to be honest, that he's a fence sitter, he's passive in his dealings, and Kenyatta definitely knew what he was doing. Whether he really engineered for coups to happen so that he's seen to be fighting those who are against the enjoyment of the uhuru that everybody fought for, is neither here or there. Thank you very much.
Mwalimu, you can remain there. I want to read a few questions from online. We have quite a number of colleagues and friends actually within and without the country. I can see Professor Mwakimbunga from Rutgers University in New York, Professor Susan Muller, who was once our colleague here in IDS for a long time, our colleague Dr. Reginald Oduor, the philosopher from the Department of Philosophy, and Professor Wawome, and many others. But let me begin with the question here on the chart from our friend Godfrey Sang. Godfrey Sang was here the other week and is coming back next week to present with me on something we are doing together. He says, and I read, "Thanks for such a wonderful presentation. In May 1971, of the 9 Kenyans implicated in the foiled attempt to overthrow the Kenyatta government, 6 of them were Luo, 3 were Kalenjins. In May 31st, 1971, standing before acting senior resident magistrate S.K. Sakideva, they pleaded guilty of taking part in the coup plot. The 9 were Joseph Ouma Muga, Apollo Wakiaga Odare, Juvenalis Aoko, Joshua Ooko, Joseph Owino, Silvanus Oduor, all 6 of them Luo, and Eliud Arab Langat, Daniel Jebkwony, and Eric Arab Jebkwony, all 3 Kalenjin. Who were these 3 Kalenjins? That's what is asking. Does anybody know something about them? Why did they get involved? What were their grievances that now Moi was a vice president? Were they innocent bystanders, collaborators, or incentivized masterminds? Think about that. The next one. Our student, Shali Odongo. Huya. What an intriguing presentation. Thanks, Dr. Gona. The only coup in Kenya that everyone talks about is the 1982 one. Like you rightly stated at the beginning of your presentation, there is scant information on the failed one of 1971. I'm curious, did Oduor and his friends ever find out why Mwalimu Nyerere did not help them as they had hoped? Let's go up. There's Helen Mwaura. We used to have a student by this name, Helen Mwaura. I don't know whether she's the one. During the trial on the coup of 1971, a lengthy statement was given by the then deputy prosecutor, the late James Karuga. Did you come across it? It revealed a lot about what transpired. Actually, this was mentioned in one of the media reports fairly recently. Let's go to another question by Charles Karani. Good presentation, Doc. My question is, was the 1971 coup a precedent for 1982? Or did it set a stage for the 1982 one? And what are the underlying factors that drive key players from one community, the Luo, to procure coups in Kenya? Let's move. There is one here by our own student, Jared Maheri. Thank you, sir. Kikuyu dominance, Kikuyunization of the military began as early as 63, 64. Was there an imminent threat of a coup at that time, or it was just for consolidation of political power? Yes, Helen Mwaura has confirmed. She was our student some years back, and I remember to have taught them when I was a young tutorial fellow in the department. Thank you, Helen, for joining us. Then Professor Wahome, our former immediate dean, Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, is asking, why choose Nyerere over Idi Amin? Why didn't they go to Amin, who looked more vibrant and more amiable to coups than Nyerere? That one is a question I could ask. Now, there are those who want to ask their questions much more directly. If you are there and you are on our online audience, please unmute and raise your question. We are waiting. We are waiting. We are waiting.
Hello.
Yes, there is Dr. Dual. Please go ahead, sir.
Yes, I just wanted to say thank you to Dr. Gona for the presentation, and to confirm that I have interacted with Mr. Juvenalis Aoko, because after he left the railways, he went to Kenya Society for the Blind, where he was doing some work there. And so my interest in that coup, as Dr. Gona points out, is we have very little writing on it. And Dr. Gona seems to have traced many of the conspirators. Are there any of the conspirators that you did not manage to talk to among the key ones? And why not? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Oduor. Any other? Please unmute yourself and go ahead. It seems like Dr. Gona, that's good for now. You can take those ones, and if there will be something online, we will bring it on. Please proceed, sir.
Okay, that's quite a number of questions here. Now, let me begin with Mwalimu Odol's concern. Oko, indeed, Mwalimu was quite an interesting person, and having interacted with him, those I've talked to indicate that he had this pictorial memory, very, very sharp gentleman who worked for the railways. And who have I talked to and whom have I not talked to? Those who were tried, were 18 in number. And unfortunately, only 2 are surviving. It is Odol, who's 86 years old now. I talked to him a couple of times, I think 4 times. There is a gentleman that, forgetting his name, is Kalenjin, and that comes to Sang's concern. I was given his contact. I'm actually going to talk to him hopefully this December. And I would want to really find out to ask Godfrey. I would really be happy to hear how he also ended up actually joining the civil conspirators. So far, there's only one survivor or surviving conspirator. Professor Home's question: why Nyerere and not Amin? The answers I got, researching around this episode was that the civil conspirators came from the angle that Amin's actions at this time, his brutality against his people, were not a very good example to actually copy, and that they would influence them in different ways than actually the bloodless coup that he had intended. Because when Amin took over, we know the stories of the killings and the people being thrown in the rivers and Lake Victoria, for that matter. So the manner in which Amin handled his coming to power and the ouster of Obote influenced the civil conspirators. I've not been able to speak to any of the military people, so I'm speaking from the civilian side. And Maeri, Coup dominance. Indeed, I mean, the fear for Kiku dominance and low dominance as large ethnic groups has always been there. That caused the rift between Kanu and Kadu, and it has remained so. That is a genuine fear. But in some circles, this was said to have been engineered by departing white settlers, that they also wanted they still had an interest in the country, and minorities therefore wanted to be seen to be complaining about these big ethnic groups. So one can see it in that angle of fear for the larger groups, genuine fear for the larger groups, but also on the flip side of that, it's also seen as engineered by the departing white communities, so to speak. Now, Karani, did the 1971 coup, was it a precedent for the 1982? As far as those involved in the coup, it's hardly to say, because a majority of those who were jailed received between 7 to 9 years. So by the time the coup happens in 1982, when 1 or 2 had just been released from prison, and that there's yet to be evidence of involvement. Actually, Odol told me that when he was arrested in 1986 for his involvement in Kenya, he was being asked about 1982, when he had absolutely nothing to do with the 1982. So there's always that assumption that there's some link between the 1971 conspirators and the 1982 conspirators. And yet that evidence isn't there as yet. Perhaps more research done on that. Now, on Mr. Dongo's question, thanks, Mr. Dongo, for that. What happened was that when these gentlemen were jailed, Odor found it really important for him to pursue the question of whether Ouma really met Nyerere. In his view, in prison, Ouma actually cried when he really was in his case. Even after they were released from prison, word had reached the doyen of Kenyan politics, Odinga, that Odor had harassed the man of letters in prison, and that was very bad. But he succeeded to learn that Ouma never, ever met Nyerere. So actually, he sold his people by showing that there was a chance to meet Nyerere, and made Oko and Owino to actually follow up on the second visitation to Tanzania, only to be arrested. And the coup, therefore, was actually discovered out of their exuberance. So indeed, Mr. Dongo, thanks for that question. But Ouma never, ever met Nyerere. I think it will be very interesting. Thanks for alerting me, Helen Maura, on this long speech. But I would need to hasten to caution that confessions in court need to be taken with a pinch of salt. And it's unfortunate we don't have the men of the conspirators. But it would have been great, and I'd really be happy to interview this gentleman in Kericho, just to hear more about that group. Otherwise, the confessions, according to Odor, they got to a point where they were writing what they were not even hearing from you, as long as it was something that would actually pin you down and be jailed for the 9 years that Odor received for participating in the coup. Godfrey, and that again, it's to mark the idea of the Luo really as being central to the coup of 1971 is an exaggeration, because there are other ethnic groups. And the point is to actually investigate further. Why were these other ethnic groups involved, which actually Godfrey Sang has asked. And I'm actually going to actually pursue that. Soon I'll be going to Kerichi to look out for this gentleman. Thank you.
Thank you, Malim. Maybe you can continue staying there so that we check if there is anybody online. I saw a question online, but as they open, for me to read that one, following from what you've just said, my reading of Ochieng Philip and Karim, their book, The Kenyatta Succession, implied in their analysis of the last days of Kenyatta's life suggests that in some quarters within the Rift Valley and Kalenjin land generally, they were beginning to probably doubt the sincerity of Vice President Moi. And they were increasingly looking at him as somebody who betrayed them, something that largely accounted for what we have as a Kikuyu diaspora in the Rift Valley. Could that explain the discontent of the Kalenjins and their involvement in this? Is something you might want to think about. I think it's worth to think about what was Moi's political base. Was it 100% support on the direction that he was going of crossing over from Kadu to Kanu, and later on being rewarded as the vice president, and goes ahead to be one of the most successful vice presidents Kenya's ever had in terms of royalty to his boss. That's something you might want to think about, in my view.
Thanks, Kenneth. Just a comment. I mean, in my everyday engagement with people who live around this, who lived around the period that Karimi and Ocheng wrote the book, it's very clear to them that actually Karimi and Ocheng were ordered to write that story by Moi. So we need to be very cautious when we are reading that succession story. And in that spirit, then, from the angle from which you asking, it's like the Kenyatta shrewdness, to play safe, to be seen to be being attacked. But in actual fact, is an aim to show that there are people who are against me. Let's fight these people as much as possible. So that's the way at which I would just pick your question, and perhaps
saying that
so we need to read Philip Ocheng and Karimi's book with a lot of
there was a consistency in Philip Ocheng's conduct. I think when he passed away a few years back, the analysis of his life and times, that his total loyalty and support to the powers that be seems to have started way back as a student in Alliance, and the role that he played as a pressman during Moi's time, becoming the chief editor of the Kenya Times and all that. That consistency was very interesting. Probably it might help us to understand what he provided us in that book. And talking about Nyerere, Nyerere, despite the ideological differences with Mzee Kenyatta, he seems to me to have followed a foreign policy that couldn't allow him to destabilize East Africa. When Amini comes and causes challenges in Uganda, it's Nyerere who supported Dr. Porte to go back and create Porte II in Uganda.
Mm-hmm.
So there is a way, I think, that even if Ouma Muga could have gotten hold of Nyerere, Nyerere could have not supported a coup in Kenya.
Mm-hmm.
The events of 1982 bear me out on that one, because Nyerere returns Ochuku to Nairobi. When Ochuku flew to Tanzania, he was actually returned to Nairobi to stand trial by Mwalimu Nyerere himself. That shows a consistency in the pursuit of his foreign policy within the East African region, but it's something that is open to debate. There's a question here from one more again, from Jared Maeri, our former MA student. Negative ethnicity comes out as a key ingredient for the planned coup of 1971. Negative ethnicity and sectarian politics is a threat to national cohesion in Kenya. Any lessons from the failed coup?
Yep.
There's another one here. There's a second one from Professor Moki Mbunga from Rutgers University in New York. It's very early now. And thank you, Prof, for persevering to wake up very early to listen to us here in Nairobi. This is late afternoon. Thank you, Dr. Gona, for the fascinating presentation. You have alluded to British intelligence sources at Coup and the interviews with some coup plotters. Could you please discuss in more detail the sources that you have used or are planning to use in your project?
Now, on Mok's concern, I think there is really a challenge in accessing these sources that are Kenyan sources. They're supposed to be accessible to us. And that's most probably I'll be using the internet access if these ones are open to accessing. It's interesting that we digitized the Kenya News Agency reports and newspapers and so many things at Uchumi House. Was part of that project sometime 3 years ago. And one can easily access the Kenya News Agency reports wherever one is in the world. But it's a challenge to access some of this information. But that's part of the effort to try to get more information about this. But I would really be interested actually to see whether there is any intelligence information with regard to this, the monitoring of these civil conspirators. I would really be interested in pursuing that. Mairi, I think maybe Mairi didn't listen or wasn't there when I was talking about the failure. By and large, the civil conspirators actually are the ones who made it not possible for the coup to take place, because the two incidences of one, Oko and Owino going to visit Nyerere, and the note given to the East African Airways sales manager who was going to London, all ended up actually exposing the plans by the civil conspirators to overthrow. So they arrested. And this is very interesting. When Owino and Oko went, and a week had passed and there was no information, Odor pretended that he didn't know anything. So the day that he went to place an advert to the Daily Nation, he was followed by the special branch to his office next to Stanley Hotel. He was working for the Canadian High Commission, and was arrested. Interesting enough, Kenyatta was shrewd. Kenyatta used ethnicity at its best, because those who arrested Odor and the subsequent people they were arrested were Luo, people he knew very well as special branch. You know, one was pretending like he's chatting to him, and the next one was telling, my friend, we just want to talk to you. Let's go to your office. And that was it. And he was brought to the special branch office, which is the Ottoman carpets next, just across the bridge. When you finish the bridge, the building on your right, that is where the special branch offices were. And he was interrogated for 2-3 weeks. The rest is history. He was convicted and jailed for. So the reason for the failure of the coup is largely the civilian section. I would call the civilian section of the conspirators, right?
That's a good one. I don't know whether there is anybody from the audience who has. Yes, there's a gentleman at the back, and Mwalimu Wanyoike over there. Yes, I can see you, Mwalimu Mary Wanyoike. Yeah, that gentleman at the back, and then Mwalimu Mary Wanyoike there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Gona. I only have 4 questions, brief questions here. Yes, you've talked about, Dr. Mbongi has talked about religious idioms, which involves everyday politics, like you are heading to Canaan. So my question is, did we have such religious idioms during the 1971 coup? And if they were, how were they instrumental? Number 2 is the topic of your PhD thesis is entitled Some Reflections on the 1971 coup. So my question is, are you specific in your presentation, or you are being diverse in delivering your opinions? Number 3 is which methodology did you use to establish your findings? Then the fourth one is, what was the impact of the coup on state hegemony at that time? Thank you.
Dr. Gona, that's one of our undergraduate students, a very consistent participant in this forum.
Yeah.
And we are very grateful to you, young man. You're a budding historian. That's how it begins. And once the bug bites you, you will stay in this room for very long. Some of us have stayed here. We have never left many years later. Thank you very much, and keep the spirit up. Mwalimu Wanyoike.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gona.
Yeah, put the mic closer to your mouth.
For that very insightful presentation. I am interested really in the contacts that were chosen by these so-called civilian conspirators. I can see in the list the intellectuals. I can see Mwalimu Nyerere. I can see the church. And as I look at them and what Dr. Ombogi said about Ouma later on in the geography department and then in Moi's government, I am made to think like in the course of whatever they were thinking about and trying to plan, they had in mind maybe much bigger than something much bigger than maybe visions, maybe selfish interests and the rest. And this is in view of the fact that if you look at Kenyan history from the period of independence onwards, there was a lift right from the beginning in pro-capitalist and anti-capitalist. And the kind of people that Muga was trying to get to engage were more on the left than on the right. Yet the stage set was that we were African socialists, and of course we know what that meant in the context. Two, when you look at Ivan, the CIA, and look at it in the context of the history of the USA, you know the kind of repression that was taking place in the USA at that time because of the Cold War. Yet Ivan is a person that they choose to go and interact with and kind of get assistance from. And that again brings another question as to why Ivan, CIA, who was now saying that you chased me from Kenya when I was trying to interrogate the issues of Tom Mboya's death. What was it that they were looking for from this CIA? Was there a connection between them and the CIA in the first place, even before they looked for the CIA? Then there's a church. And you described, I think it is the same person who was going to the Catholic Church at Makadara and telling the people that they should ceremonize their marriages, the children should be baptized and all. Okay, religion has been used severally to be a shield of what is happening behind the scenes. It has been used to support rebellion and other things, like in this case, it was a coup that it was supposed to support. How far did they go in engaging the church members? To what extent were they able to reach out to the church to make them a follower of this conspiracy, to reach out to the Asians that you mentioned, to make them followers of this conspiracy? Okay, I think that will do for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Malim, let me ask the last one. I hope I'm not turning it into a monologue between us. Could you just share with us the role of Kenyatta's, socio-political stature? Kenyatta had reached a point where he had this image that was bigger than life. A lot of mystery was associated with him, magical powers. I remember speaking to one of the ministers in his government, in his retirement. He told me, Kenyatta will look at you with those piercing eyes that even if you were the most courageous of the people, you will tremble before him. He is known to have used a few unprintables towards his ministers, and there are rumors that he used to occasionally to cane some of them. He used to use his pakora on some of them who he thought were not doing what they ought to do. So what I'm wondering, and I had a chance one time to describe Kenyatta over an interview on KBC TV. What role did this stature play in, suppressing, some of these events, either within the military or within the civil population, that were sometimes aimed at overthrowing him or challenging his supremacy, as it were. I remember I was a small little boy when he died in '78, and we abandoned everything when that was announced, and we went home because, according to my father, Kenya was ending with Kenyatta. So we left. We were harvesting maize, and we left it there, and we went home to wait to die. Thank God we didn't die. I'm here today. Yeah, that was the end of Kenya. How did this, invincible stature of an elder statesman, old enough to look prophetic, and all the things that go with that, prevent some of the things that happened elsewhere in Africa?
Right. Let me deal with the Kenneth's question. I think image matters. Image matters. Representation matters. If you read the reports that Charles Hornsby talks about, the intelligence reports, they are talking about Dolo thinking of actually ousting him before he died. So there's already talk about Kenyatta's age and that he's too old, that he's going to die. Fortunately, he didn't die until 1978. So I think, in my view, that image is actually cultivated by those around him. It was not Kenyatta's image. That's why I said Kenyatta was shrewd. He allowed Joroge Mungai, Mbuiko Nange, Njonjo, and the rest to create this fear of this omnipresent president. He didn't know, even when you say that he died. My friend, Professor Mwakimako, was that day he died in Kwale. They were at State House Mombasa waiting to entertain him, and there was a Fiji, right? Just to keep that image of this man that you can't challenge. So credit actually should be given to these people who actually could actually think of conspiring to topple Kenyatta, and particularly from the civil side of the divide. So image for me is very, very important. The stature is there, but it's created by those around him, and that has been demonstrated, particularly from the time when you have the whole thing in 1969. Then there's an image that somebody is going to do something against our man. The president has to remain in the House of Mumbi, and let's do everything in our capacity to keep that in the House of Mumbi. Now, our junior budding scholar, the idea of heading to Canaan, indeed, from the discussions that Odol had with Owino in Sega, and then subsequently when Odol introduces Owino to Oko, there is very much talk about the downtrodden, I think the kind of towards Canaan and saving the Israelites in our current political dispensation has very much the same similar language, that we are suffering this world and we're going to go into a better world. So there is actually a resonance. There is actually resonance in that sense. I had said that my topic had slightly changed in terms of being specific. I changed it from reflections to the 1971 coup in Kenya, unraveling the civilian side of an insurrection. So that was the change. It may change it may change even more as I continue. Methodology. Of course, I did the newspaper research, their archives. I'm still engaging the archives and see whether something's very difficult to work at the archives nowadays. It's really messed up, but I hope can talk to Ndiwa. She seemed to have better eyes to identify where some of these materials are. Of course, I did oral interviews. What were the impacts of the coup? There's serious impacts. Of course, there's social dislocation. I gave the example of Miss Mboya being forced to be inherited when she had actually refused to be inherited, and so that's one impact. The other impact was that there's actually an exodus from Luo Nyanza. That's something that somebody would want to pursue. The people who went to live in Tororo and many other places. One of my master's undergraduate students actually told me that her grandmother and the grandfather lived in Tororo for a very long time, and many others. Somebody told me that I'm not sure about this, but Ida's family, the father also, because of this event, they crossed over and for many years until Kenyatta died in 1979. Is some of them then came back. Now, Mary, why? Let me deal with the church, right? Church as shield. I don't think we can give an excuse for using the church as a basis for which people propagate their agenda, right? The church will talk about the suffering of the people. So if you can identify the suffering of the people and use the channel of the church to articulate the people's suffering and the need for change, so be it. And that they did very well. They did articulate this position very well. The approach to Ivy was more personal than CIA, because they were appealing to Ivan for having been a personal friend of Tom Mboya and for having made so much noise when Tom Mboya, his friend, had been killed. Of course, there is the idea that Tom Mboya was a CIA agent, but this particular one was an appeal for funds from a friend of Tom Mboya, whom they wanted to avenge for. The extent to which these conspirators asked members to participate, there's information in the reports, the newspaper reports, about the confessions that each of these conspirators and others of the 18 who were involved, including Wakiaga and others, they were actually detailed to talk to people about their plan. So there's that possibility. I haven't come across people who are really informed of, but there was talk, right? The confessions that are recorded stipulate that there were people who were sensitized about the ongoings. Ndolo himself, we've mentioned this, 13 times he met people in his home in Ukambani, where he talked to people about the impending plan to overthrow Jomo Kenyatta. Thanks.
You need to remain there. Our time is up, but there's a comment and a question which I think is important for you to answer, and the other one listen to. There's a question here from our colleague, Professor Susan Muller from the US. She's asking, how important were Mboya's assassination and the banning of the KPU in motivating the coup plotters? And have you found anything in the archives on this? Then there's a second part of it. How important were Mboya's assassination? No, that's trying to clear that, but I think you have had the question. Dr. Reginald Odor comes in with a comment. This is a caution, I think, with regard to the question that was raised by Jared Maeri. He says the discourse on negative ethnicity should be revisited because it proceeds from the assumption that the maps drawn in Berlin in the mid-1880s were logical. It also disregards the colonial divide and rule genesis of inter-ethnic tensions.
Thanks, Mwalimu Odor, for that. Now, let's be honest. There's yet to be an unearthing or discovery of KPU documents. Whether for hate, for anything KPU, to be honest, that is yet to be unraveled. There's very, very little information about KPU. What these people would do, and for anyone who had adherence and following for KPU, when they arrested you, they turned upside down all the information. From those I've interviewed for this paper, having been involved in the coup and also associated with KPU, they lost everything, literally everything. Before Odol died, I mean, before Oku died, rather, when I talked to him, he said, look, I had so much newspaper cuttings. I had so much information I had gathered as somebody who was interested in history and understanding our country that was taken away and I never received back. Odol told me the same thing. And I think this happens because of fear. Some people, because of fear, give my own experience with the researching on this lady that I'm about to finish writing the book. In 1985, she took all the books. She cried that evening and went to dump those Marxist, communist writings, Max Gorky and all that, dump that in a pit latrine. When you save your skin, you won't go back to the latrine and retrieve those. So many people lost their material. So with regard to KPU, I have very little information about it. Indeed, as I've demonstrated, Tom Mboya's death really motivated many of these people. While he seemed to have been really a darling of many during his life, because of facilitating Kenyatta's consolidation of power, the manner in which he was handled, the manner in which he was killed by Kenyatta and his men really touched many, to the point that now he became again a person liked by many, and for the Luo, he became their own son, when actually they thought this man was far from them when he was alive. So indeed, Tom Mboya was a very central figure in motivating the civil conspirators to organize the coup. For them, it was a revolution.
All right, thank you, Mwalim. We'll end it there. I wish we had more time. We need to stop at 4:30. We are 5 minutes late. But nevertheless, you will agree with me that it has been a very fruitful evening here in Nairobi. And those of us who are following online from different time zones around the world, I also want to believe that you have benefited from some of the insights that have come out of this discussion and the debate this evening. At this point, I want to take the opportunity and the privilege to invite my teacher, Mwalimu Ngesa. I always behave in her presence because she met me when I was a little boy in first year. And I'm sure there are things she knows that no one of you knows. So Mwalimu karibu to give us a vote of thanks.
Good afternoon, everybody. My chair, who says I was his teacher. Yes, I was for a short time, and I'm proud to have been, because he was as brilliant as you can see, as you have always known. So I'm proud to have been his teacher. I'm here to just give a vote of thanks, so I'm not going to take too much of your time, but I want to really start with our presenter, Dr. Gona, for giving us a very enlightening presentation, a wonderful discussion. And I just want to say that until now, the whole issue of the 1971 attempted coup has been very opaque to me. Very, very opaque. In fact, I think even after doing history for so long, I got to learn about this event just a few years ago. And I wondered, is this true? What we know is that there was an attempted coup in 1982. So thank you very much, Dr. Gona, for giving us that very good presentation. It just leaves me wondering about one thing, which just came to my mind. And I could not ask Dr. Gona to answer this. Did this man, Brown, ever get to know that the letter he posted let the cat out of the bag? I wonder. I want also to thank all of us who are here physically present. Thank you very much for coming to listen and to grace the occasion. We are proud of you. Those of us who are online, thank you most sincerely, and please continue coming, because we have these seminars every Thursday. And I want to also thank our technology, the people in charge of our technology and everyone else. Thank you very, very much, and have a wonderful evening.